This is Patrick Stinson with a little video on some basics for constructing a timeline. The reason I'm putting this video together is because the timeline and the diagram are together the backbone of understanding a family using the Family Diagram app. The diagram has been a part of applying Bowen theory to human problems since the beginning, and it's an integral part. Whenever a coach sees a client, one of the very first things that happens is that a family diagram is constructed, which just has the basics about reproductive structure in the family, which is essentially who is who, how they're related, and maybe some basic details about the emotional process in the family, how the family manages stress and anxiety. So what the app brings to the table is a timeline. And it does this in a number of ways, but nominally, when you add births and deaths to people in the diagram, it automatically compiles them in an overall family timeline. And then you can fill out the timeline with the other important events, notable events in the family's history in order to understand what is predictable in the way that this family manages tension and anxiety, which is what Bowen theory describes. So engaging it with the app for the first time, I think, really requires a person to construct a timeline. And just merely constructing a timeline forces one to get a lot clearer about what is known and what is not known about a family. Before, you could just draw a 2D diagram and maybe put some dates on there to where a timeline was implied. But here, the timeline is formalized. And so, what goes into the timeline? A timeline should only contain facts. In fact, the entire diagram, timeline or not, should only contain facts. But when you're talking about humans, getting clear on what is and is not a fact becomes a pretty important thing in constructing a timeline, because it's so easy to get caught up in opinion or subjective impression and proceed with it as if it is a fact. So, for example, a person might say, well, my mother never liked me, or I never got along with my sibling, or, we never talked to my dad's family because they are so-and-so, and, these kinds of things which tend to be more really subjective impression than objective fact. And a systems assessment or investigation uncovers a multitude of details that kind of transforms those impressions into fact to get a more accurate view of what's going on. But a timeline, most simply, contains regular facts, that births and deaths occurred on this or that date. That is a fact in time that can be converged upon in conversation. Maybe a date isn't known. That's fine. A lot of dates are frequently unknown, and you do the best you can. So the first thing that you're entering in is ballpark when a person was born. I use the convention, if I only know the year, for example, I just set the month and the date as 1/1, 1982. It means somewhere in 1982 this event happened, for example. But just to try to start to enter in information into the timeline. So you've got those normal facts. Now, Murray Bowen introduced this idea of a functional fact, which helps slice the subjectivity out of historical information to keep the information based on facts. So an example of a functional fact is something like a feeling orientation flipping, or a shift in a subjective impression, or the fact that a subjective impression occurred. Because these things occur in relation to the predictable processes that are going on in the family, according to Bowen theory. So, for example, the prototypical example of a functional fact is that a person had a dream is a fact. What the dream meant and all this kind of stuff may or may not be factual. In fact, it's rarely factual. But that the person had a dream can be a fact, and that it happened on a current day, a particular day, can be a fact. That it happened before a birth and not after a birth, or something like that, can be a fact. And a systems assessment is, of course, correlating important events through time. So these things become incredibly useful. One example of a functional fact that occurred in a case for me was when there was a diagnosis and a shift in functioning for a particular family member, a grandmother to a client. There was a diagnosis with all these medical symptoms, and at the same time, that person's political orientation shifted in a polarized manner. They went from, being on one side of the aisle, proverbial political aisle, to another, a hard position in one direction to a hard position in the other. And their view on religion also shifted in that kind of binary, polarized way. It went from hard one way to hard the other way. So it is a fact that the shift occurred, that a shift in that opinion occurred. Getting into whether or not the opinion of whether this or that perspective on life or political orientation is more valid than another is not a fact. But it is a fact that the shift occurred. So the timeline consists of facts in this manner. Births, deaths, hirings, firings, cutoffs, resolution of cutoff, that a shift in focus from one person to another, from the parents prototypically, could be a fact if it was marked enough. Divorces, all of these things, marking these on the timeline and getting them at least in order, if not with precise dates, is one important step, if not maybe the first important step in putting a case into the app. I think it goes without saying, or it's more straightforward, it's more self-evident how to construct the diagram, because we all get, that everybody has parents, and then you just need to know how to set up those relationships on the diagram, which are covered in the tutorial videos for the Family Diagram app. But what is not as clear is what goes on the diagram. And I've worked with a number of people who are even very experienced with Bowen theory, who are starting to get used to thinking in this new way of putting together what is known about the chronological timeline of this family that is being worked on. So I offer individual consultation sessions for using the app after the typical technical support options are exhausted, starting with email support, just answering questions. That's the most typical. And then when somebody's got a little bit more of a substantial thing that they're working on, and usually if they've got some training in Bowen theory, then I'll have an individual consultation session with them. And so what I am discovering is that it makes a huge difference if that person has gone through the effort, put the effort in to just compile a timeline of the family prior to that consultation session. And that is regardless of their level of experience with Bowen theory. So my goal here with this video is to just point out that what goes into a timeline, which I've hopefully described, and that putting together a timeline, at least on paper, and then into the app, so long as that's technically possible for that person, is the first step and an essential step. It's an unavoidable step in entering a case into the app. And once you do accomplish that, the reason that it is so important is not only is the app organized around the timeline and the diagram, where neither one can be avoided, But when you construct a timeline, when you start putting things in order, it is a major step towards systems thinking, where systems thinking is thinking in terms of how processes play out over time, because that automatically forces you to get more objective about what is and is not known about the family. So if you're putting together a table with a date as the basic column, the first basic column, and a description or a title for the second basic column, and that would be the fact that occurred on that date, then it automatically has you organize what is known and what is not known about the family as a system. And a system is something that has predictable behavior through time. Not all the dates are going to be known. You do the best you can. You try at least, if you don't have dates for a particular event or even a whole slew of events, then you do the best you can to write out the dates for the events that you do have, get the facts to be as short and concise as possible. And then when you don't have dates, at least try to get the order right. And then if you don't have even the order, just to take note of that and to say, well, here's these other events that I know or I suspect were very important in the family, but I don't have dates for them yet, and I'm not even really sure if they occurred before or after these other dates, but to systematically lay out what is known and not known. And putting a timeline together is a huge step in that direction. And this is a simple task, actually. But it looks like it's probably a new task to get this formal about it. I don't think it's doing anything different than has ever been attempted in Bowen theory before. It's just doing it more rigorously. It's just accomplishing a basic task in the application of Bowen theory more completely. That doesn't mean having every single event to describe a particular family or a particular aspect of the emotional process in a family. It's not like you have to have all the dates. The task is just to put down what is known. That includes the dates. It includes what occurred on those dates. If you don't have the dates, next step is at least try to get the order right. Leave a few dates out, just do it on paper. And if you don't have the order right, if you're not even clear on that, at least to write down that events occurred, but leaving the dates out so that you can clarify that down the road. So I hope this makes sense. I think that compiling a timeline is the essential first step for cataloging a case in the app. It goes without saying that putting the diagram together is part of it, but that one cannot proceed in making use of the app without constructing a timeline, at least on paper, before putting it into the app. So I'd like, as always, to hear any kind of feedback about what is clear and not clear in this video. And I hope that you can make use of the app as much as you can. Bye-bye.